The envelope landed right on the incision, a thick, sharp corner hitting fresh stitches and new nerve endings. I saw my husband's polished shoes, heard his mistress's ring catch the fluorescent light, felt his mother's smile from the doorway. My first thought was that this was a hallucination from the anesthesia. My second thought was that I had been sleeping next to a stranger for 3 years. A stranger who had been waiting for this exact moment. What do you do when you realize you were never a wife, but a key component in a medical transaction? When your entire marriage is just a long, elaborate surgery prep? He didn't love me. He needed my kidney to save his mother. And he had just gotten what he came for. My name is Brain. And this is the story of how I lost an organ and found out exactly what I was made of. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew your name and brought you casseroles when your father passed. I remember the smell of those casseroles more than I remember his funeral. My dad died when I was 19. My mother followed 2 years later, and not from any illness doctors could name. She stopped eating properly. She stopped answering the phone. She just stopped wanting to be here. I found her in the kitchen, the kettle still on, like she'd meant to make tea and changed her mind about everything else at the same time. So I inherited a house I couldn't bring myself to sell, a small savings account, and a loneliness so absolute it had weight. I could feel it in my shoulders some mornings. I moved to Chicago with 2 suitcases and a degree I wasn't sure what to do with. I was a quiet person with a quiet life. The kind of person who believes in the good in others because she knows exactly what the absence of it feels like. Isn't that the most dangerous kind of person to be? The one who's been so starved of connection that any scrap of attention feels like a feast? I met Conrad at a hospital gala I almost didn't attend. He was rich, polished, and the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He asked if I was hiding, too. I laughed. And that laugh cost me everything. The kindness wasn't real. It was a blueprint. I didn't know it then, but he already knew the brand of tea I liked before he ever offered to buy me a cup. He already knew the date my mother died before I ever brought it up, and when I finally did mention it, months later he held my hand and said nothing, like a man giving someone space to grieve. I thought that was empathy. It was research, already collected, simply being deployed at the right moment. He constructed a version of himself specifically designed to make me fall. I fell completely. We were married 11 months later. His mother, Georgiana, attended with visible reluctance, as if I were something temporary in her son's life. I tried so hard to prove her wrong, but Conrad always took her side. Gently, diplomatically, but always hers. I told myself that was just how families worked. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself a lot of things. Everything changed when Georgiana's kidneys began to fail. Within a year, she was on the transplant list with a rare blood type and a very long wait. Then Conrad came to me, red-eyed. Vulnerable, he framed it as a question. "You're my wife. Your family. Would you consider being tested?" He didn't need to ask twice. That was my first mistake, not seeing the difference between a request and a trap. The test came back. I was a match. Conrad held me for a long time that night, and I was certain I saw real tears. He told me I was the most extraordinary person he had ever known, that he would spend the rest of his life being grateful. 3 months later, I signed the consent forms and checked into the hospital. I never once doubted it was the right thing to do. Would you? I woke up in the wrong room. Conrad had promised me the private recovery suite with the wide windows. Instead, I was in a converted storage room that smelled of bleach and despair, water stains on the ceiling, a cracked call button. My left side felt like someone had reached inside me and pulled out something I could never get back. Because they had. I told myself he was just delayed. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation for all of it. Then the door opened. Conrad walked in first, suit pressed, every hair in place. Behind him came Georgiana in a wheelchair, wrapped in cashmere, looking healthier than she had any right to be. And beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, stood Sable Voss, a woman who had always been around Conrad's company, vague and beautiful and expensive. She was wearing a red dress and a diamond ring I had never seen before. Conrad moved to the foot of my bed. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't thank me. He just looked at me with that cold, boardroom expression and dropped a thick envelope onto my chest. The impact hit my surgical wound directly. The pain was so sharp my vision went white. "Divorce papers," he said, his voice utterly calm. "I've already signed. You just need to add yours." I stared at him, gasping. "I just gave your mother my where." Georgiana cut in from her wheelchair. It was appreciated. I didn't understand. My brain couldn't process the words against the weight of the betrayal. "You married me," I whispered, the truth dawning like a cold sickness, "to harvest my kidney." "I married you," he agreed, his tone patient and clinical, "because you are the only compatible match we could find who was also in a position to be persuaded. Single, isolated, no close family." He paused. "You responded exactly as we hoped. What do you say to a man who tells you your life was just a checklist?" Georgiana smiled. Sable extended her left hand, letting the diamond catch the light. "We've been together for 2 years," she said. The engagement was always the plan. Conrad set a check on the tray beside me. $50,000, enough to relocate and start over. Sign today. And the funds transfer within 48 hours. "And if I don't sign?" His expression didn't change. "Then we make the process longer and considerably less comfortable for you, alone in the wrong room, with a shattered chest, a check I hadn't asked for, and the devastating understanding that I had been hunted by people who saw me as spare parts." I didn't cry. I was in too much shock to cry. But then the door opened again. I braced for more. Another cold declaration. Instead, a man in surgical scrubs stepped inside and quietly closed the door. He was perhaps 55, with silver at his temples and the unhurried calm of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. "Miss Hale," he said. "I'm Dr. Whitmore. I performed your procedure." He pulled a chair to my bedside and sat down. That small gesture told me immediately that whatever he had to say was something he wasn't going to deliver standing up. "I need to inform you of something," he said, his voice careful. "Before the Bennett family leaves the building, the kidney was transplanted successfully," he began, "but not into Georgiana Bennett." The room seemed to hold its breath. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a rasp. "The recipient of your kidney is a 14-year-old girl named Cassidy Rann. She had been on the transplant list for 3 years. She was in critical condition. She received your kidney this morning. As of an hour ago, her body is accepting it without complication." I stared at him. "Then where is Georgiana's?" His expression turned grim. "Georgiana Bennett was not transplanted this morning." When our verification flagged a compatibility issue with her blood work, a discrepancy that suggests the tests submitted to this hospital were falsified, the surgical team redirected the organ to the next verified match on the National Registry. That was Cassidy. The word falsified landed like a stone in still water. The Bennetts had faked the medical documents. They had forged a hospital's process. They had defrauded a national registry, all to get my kidney. I was not a wife. I was a target. I've already contacted hospital compliance and the National Organ Oversight Board, Dr. Whitmore said. Organ donation fraud is a federal matter now. Cassidy, I whispered. Is she going to be okay? His expression shifted into something warm. She's going to be fine. Better than fine. You saved her life this morning, Miss Hale. Whatever else is happening in this situation, that part is real. Something cracked open in my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. Here's a question worth sitting with. If Cassidy hadn't been a match, if the fraud hadn't been caught, would Conrad's plan have simply worked? How many marriages out there are quietly built on a need, not a feeling, and never get discovered at all? I needed to call someone. Her name was Adrienne Marsh, my college roommate, closest friend, and for the last 4 years, one of the most effective civil litigation attorneys in the state of Illinois. She picked up on the second ring. When I told her where I was and what had happened, she said one sentence before she hung up. Don't sign a thing. I'm on my way. Adrienne arrived in 40 minutes, still in her courtroom blazer. She took one look at me in that converted room and her expression went very still. Tell me everything, she said. And I did. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she stood. The fraud piece is already in motion. That's federal territory now. What I'm going to focus on is the civil side. Her eyes were sharp. Breen, the Bennett family pharmaceutical company is worth approximately $400 million. You have grounds. I didn't want his money. I was surprised by how true that was. Then what do you want? She asked. I thought about Cassidy. I thought about Conrad's cold voice telling me I had responded exactly as we hoped. I thought about Sable's ring, Georgiana's smile. I want them to answer for it, I said. Publicly, all of it. Adrienne smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone very good at what she does. We found Conrad on the second floor, in the family waiting area, me in a hospital gown with an IV still in my arm. Adrienne 2 steps ahead of me like a storm front. He looked up, and for the first time since I'd known him, his composure shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Breen, he said, his voice careful. You should be resting. Probably, I agreed. Adrienne handed him a document. Notice of intent to file for fraud-based annulment, civil damages, and marital asset division. You'll also note the federal matter. The Organ Oversight Board has already been contacted. You have no standing here, Georgiana said from her wheelchair. She signed consent forms. Consent obtained through fraud is not valid consent, Adrienne said. And a marriage entered for the purpose of accessing an unwitting donor is going to be very difficult to defend in front of a jury. The word jury landed exactly as she intended. Conrad's jaw tightened. Sable's hand dropped to her side. Security appeared at the end of the hall. Let's talk about this reasonably, Conrad said, reaching for the version of himself I'd once loved. We are being reasonable, I said. This is what reasonable looks like when you run out of time. He was escorted into a consultation room. Georgiana followed. Sable walked quickly to the elevator without looking back. The federal investigation opened within 72 hours. The consultant the Bennetts had paid to falsify Georgiana's compatibility records lost his medical license by the end of the month, and within a week he was naming names to investigators to save himself, which meant Conrad's own emails came up in discovery. 4 years of them. Messages about identifying a compatible donor through social means, my blood type, my family status, my psychological profile laid out like a spreadsheet months before he ever said hello to me at that gala. Adrienne read the first one aloud to me before the trial. I had to ask her to stop halfway through. At trial, Conrad's lawyer tried to argue the marriage had been entered in good faith. I watched the jury's faces while he said it. Not one of them was buying it. When Adrienne stood to cross-examine, she didn't raise her voice once. She simply read his own words back to him, line by line, in his own clinical tone, until he stopped being able to look at the jury box at all. Deliberations took less than a day. When the foreman read the verdict, Conrad stared straight ahead like a man watching his own reflection disappear. Georgiana's hand found his arm. He didn't react to it. The damages were significant. The criminal fraud charges carried consequences no settlement could soften. Georgiana Bennett found a legitimate match 14 months later through the actual registry, no shortcuts. I didn't feel guilty about that. I had made my peace with my kidney long before I understood what it had really saved. I left Chicago 8 months after the trial, not because I was running, because I was ready. I moved to a coastal town in North Carolina that reminded me in small sideways ways of the Ohio town I'd grown up in. I took a position consulting for a nonprofit focused on organ donor advocacy, closing the gaps that let what happened to me happen at all. Cassidy Rand went home 3 weeks after her surgery. Her mother sent a letter that Dr. Whitmore passed along to me, 2 pages, handwritten, the paper soft now from how many times I've read it. Cassidy wants to be a marine biologist. She missed 2 years of school and is going back in the fall. Last month, she sent me a photo from her first dive certification class. She's laughing underwater, mask half fogged, one hand giving a thumbs up to whoever was holding the camera. She doesn't know my name. And that is exactly as it should be. I'm not fixed. I want to be honest about that. There are still nights when I lie still and feel the absence where the kidney used to be, and think about the person I was at that gala, laughing at a question from a man who had already studied me like a blueprint. But here is what I also know. I gave away something I cannot get back. But it went somewhere real. It went somewhere it was wanted. The people who thought they could hollow me out and leave me behind in a storage room with a check and a cracked call button, they found out exactly what I was made of. Real manipulation always wears the face of love. If you're watching this and feeling like someone in your life sees you as a transaction instead of a person, know this: your value is not determined by what they can take from you. Your strength is discovered the moment you realize you have nothing left to prove to people who were never on your side. If this story hit you, please hit like. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter. And subscribe to When Family Revenge Strikes, because the most powerful revenge isn't just getting even, it's becoming someone they can never touch again. The most sacred organ I gave away was my trust. The most powerful one I kept was my voice.